So welcome everyone to our last panel for today. I am Megan Shamas and I am the Director of Marketing for the FIDO Alliance. I want to thank you all for attending this Authenticate Summit, which today we focused on the role of modern authentication in financial services. Super pleased to be moderating this panel, which we're going to focus now on the role of user experience in a successful FIDO deployment. So we know there's been tremendous progress in FIDO adoption, really in terms of the sheer number of devices that are ready for FIDO authentication right now and the OS and browser support that we've seen over the past couple of years. If you heard Andrew Shikiar speak earlier today in his welcome address, I think he put that number at around 4 billion devices. I think that that's conservative, but that really shows that readiness of devices in the market that are putting us at the cusp of mass deployment of FIDO to consumers. But we also know that FIDO is an easier form of authentication, right? You know, you can use the mechanism that you unlock now to log in, just look at the camera or touch the fingerprint, but it does require behavioral change on the part of our consumers and your customers. And that's especially true in the desktop and laptop environment, where leveraging a biometric, or we call it a platform authenticator sometimes, to unlock with Windows Hello or Mac Touch ID, for example, that's pretty new still. So logging in with that mechanism is even more new. So we know FIDO is simpler and stronger, and that's why you're deploying it. But to really realize those benefits as a service provider, you need your customers to take an action and opt in to that form of login. So here's the $10 million question. How do you build a user experience that will get your customers into an enrollment flow so that they can opt in to logging in with FIDO with their built-in biometric authenticators? This is what we're looking at within the FIDO Alliance. We're doing our own user testing with a third-party UX testing firm with the goal of providing comprehensive UX guidance to the industry later this year. It's really beneficial to us that we are a member-driven organization, because many of our board member companies are now looking at this too, and they have UX experts that are willing to do the heavy lift and help us out in designing the user flows that we're now testing to determine that best user experience for FIDO enrollment. And we're looking specifically at UX in the regulated environment, particularly banking as a first use case. So it does make a lot of sense that we're talking about this here today at this Authenticate Summit. I have 3 of these experts here with us today for this panel. We have Kerry Hebert from Visa, Kevin Goldman from Trusona, and Judy Clare from JPMorgan Chase. And I'd like to turn it now to each of them to introduce themselves. And I've also asked them, when they're introducing themselves, if they could just give some of their introductory thoughts on why they see UX as such an important aspect of a FIDO deployment. And we'll start with Kerry.
Hi, my name is Kerry Hebert. I lead the customer experience design and research for Visa authentication products and services. I'm based in London, England, and I've been with Visa for about 5.5 years. All right, so my thoughts, I guess there's like 2 key questions like I'd ask, right? Like 1, why are you implementing FIDO? What problem are you trying to solve? Like 2, what is that value proposition for your users? What's in it for them? Like, that's super important. And I suspect that those answers are going to be really different from one another. But here's the thing, is like your FIDO implementation hinges on user adoption. And that adoption is only going to happen if a user registers. So for your users to take that critical step, they need to believe that there's value in what you're offering, that there's like you're going to make their life a little bit better in some way. So.
Hi, I'm Kevin Goldman. I'm the Chief Experience Officer for Trusona. And Trusona is a solutions provider for FIDO. And I guess I would frame it like this: as Megan eloquently said, and also Kerry alluded to it too, is we're really on the cusp of creating a behavior change from multi-generations of being used to and having the behavior of using username and password, to feeling comfortable and secure logging in the new way. So a lot of that has to do with technical bits and bytes. And I'm sure the audience is very familiar with that, those technical bits and bytes around FIDO. But there's also a really important component. That's the human side of the screen. That's how do we get people to adopt a new behavior? And that's definitely where user experience comes in and what we'll be talking about for half hour or an hour.
Hi, I'm Judy Clare with JPMorgan Chase. I'm with the Digital Identification and Authentication team. And as such, we look at authentication capabilities on the mobile and web channels. As y'all have referred to, Kerry, Megan, and Kevin, adoption is really key and trying to really get customers engaged. And I guess I would say that one of the key things is just thinking about what is the customer experience going to be? How can we keep it simple for them, make it easy for them to understand? There's such a broad range of customers out there with varying experiences. And how do we make this digestible for them? How do we make it easy and simple, yet safe and secure, and just really help the customer experience along? And why are we trying to do that? And who are our customers really? And what would make it most appealing to them to get them to adopt it?
Thank you so much, Kerry, Kevin, and Judy. So I'm going to start just asking some questions, and then we'll open up the Q&A in a little bit. So get your questions ready. So thank you for your introductory comments. I think it might be helpful to try to sort of level set with our audience, which is, how do you recommend that companies start to even define this concept of user experience in the context of their FIDO authentication deployment? And I know Kerry, for example, gave a few questions that folks should be asking themselves, but what are some starter questions that you should ask as a starting point? And we'll start with Kerry.
Okay. Yeah. I pretty much said it in my intro. I feel like the most important, the question that you have to start with is, what problem are you trying to solve? Like, why are you implementing FIDO? And to be super clear about what that is, because once you have clarity around the problem that you want to solve, then you need to flip that around and now say, well, how does that actually translate into a user experience? Like, what does that mean for them? Because I can promise you that those answers are going to be very different. Users don't know about FIDO. They really don't care about FIDO. So you have to be able to put yourself into their shoes and to think like them and to say, all right, well, why would this be important to them? And to just start digging into that. So if you look at why you're actually deploying this, well, how does that translate to your customer? So the more that you can dig into that, the better. And you'll hear me say it over and over again, but you have to have adoption. And if you don't have user adoption, then your implementation, your deployment is going to go absolutely nowhere. So that is like the moment of truth, right? Is how do you get a user into a registration flow, whatever that happens to be, for you. So really thinking about that.
Thanks, Kerry. Judy, you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. Just building off of what Kerry said, all great thoughts. Just adding on, you really need to think about, what do you want the customer experience to be? What's your end goal? How do you want them to be able to interact with your site, and just working backwards to what you want that experience to be, and just really managing the customer journey and the customer's expectations. And a lot of that is around looking at what's the messaging. How do I keep it simple and clear and understandable and digestible? And how do we get them to start clicking on what's the key messaging, putting it in an affirmative way, in a positive way, and easily understood by them so that they can work through it easily. I think that's really a key feature, because otherwise their eyes are going to glaze and you're going to lose them. You have to really understand the customer. Not all customers are created equal. And so you kind of have to pitch to the varying levels. Some are just like, what is this? How do I get through it? How do I get into my account? Whereas others will be like, well, what does this mean? And how is it going to impact me? But doing it in clear, easy to understand messaging, and pitching it to the different levels as they're going to want it.
Thanks, Judy. Kevin, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. So I think we're talking about, where to start on the user experience. Definitely what Claire and Kerry already said. Kerry, I couldn't agree more. A problem well defined is a problem half solved. So that problem definition is so important. And definitely agree with Judy. Steve Jobs said it probably most famously, is you have to start with the end user experience. Start with that end user experience and work backwards. What do you need to do to achieve that end user experience? And you know, I think it's real tempting. Everybody falls into the trap of starting with the technology and starting with the bits and bytes, but you really do have to start your FIDO deployment with a clear vision for what that end user experience is going to be. And if there was one more I would add, is another great place to start is really look at your team. You know, just look at your team that's deploying or going to deploy FIDO and say, you know, who is on this team? Are there UX researchers? Are there UX designers? Are there UX copywriters? Do you have a diversity of teams? So you're talking business folks, you know, the design folks, the research folks, the IT admins, setting up from the very, very get-go. The right diversity of team is really important. So definitely think about that, and don't think about user experience as something you kind of bolt on to the end, because that'll often go south. You won't achieve those UX goals. Bring UX in at the very, very early parts of the planning.
Great, thanks so much. I want to return back to something from earlier, which was regarding the timing. And so, you know, at FIDO Alliance, we have been very focused on, you know, spec development, and then, of course, you know, the publishing of specifications, and then gaining that adoption that I referenced earlier. And when we talk about deployments, we've talked for a very long time about what Kevin said. I think he said the bits and bytes with regard to technical implementation. But when you're planning a deployment, at what point in that process should you start thinking about UX? And actually, Judy, let's return back to you for this one.
Sure. I think UX is something you have to think about up front. It's really, as I was saying, it's really important to understand how the journey is going to go, and bringing UX in up front, getting down the design, the layout, and the research, and understanding what competitors and what the market in general is doing, and getting that UX perspective of how to get your journey and your messaging across is really going to be key. So the sooner you can bring them in, the better you're going to be to have them lay it out. And, you know, and of course, working with IT to say what's capable of how they can actually make it happen is also very important. In the banking world, it's also key to have risk brought in to make sure that you're addressing all of their concerns as you're going through and laying out the UX design, and in case there's some implications on that, and with the content, but making sure that you have all those considerations. And UX really tends to be the one to help bring that together and really drive the focus into what the journey is going to be. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So the sooner you can help your UX designers get it down on a screen and really working through it. I know in our experience with the task force, it was really key when we could see the flow and start manipulating it, and it really just triggered things of, well, what about this and how about that, and can we streamline this and fix the messaging here to be clearer and more succinct, and being able to really manage and maneuver that was key for us when we were creating it.
Kevin?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Judy. And so I just don't repeat everything that you said, because I agree with it all. I'll just say, what are some of the activities that the UX team will do with your IT staff if you're not familiar, maybe working with UX teams. And I'll just go to one small example. UX team might be able to put together a design sprint, and a design sprint might be 1-2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at most. And there's tremendous value that you can get out of a UX team from that sprint. One, it's going to have all the players that Judy mentioned, the IT group, the risk group, you know, engineers, different business stakeholders, product managers. And in a very short amount of time, you'll end up with a visualization of what that end user experience it is that we want to drive towards. And those design sprints really help align teams, demystify really what it is that we're trying to achieve as an organization. And, you know, all that to say, there's lots of places, lots of different activities to start with, but the key is bring that UX team in, and they'll help define how to get some real great wins early on in the process.
Kevin, when you talk about a design sprint, could you define that a little bit? Is it like an all hands on deck kind of a, bringing all the teams and kind of heads down for an amount of time to get a vision of what the UX looks like? Or tell us what that is.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways of going about it. Most recently, there's been a book by Google Ventures that talks about design sprint. They do it in a week. The methodology goes back many decades in industrial design, and usually it's just a time-boxed, cross-disciplinary way of empathizing with your end users, defining the problem, creating a prototype, and then testing that prototype. And all of that can happen again in weeks. That's the idea of a sprint. It's not months and it's not years.
Carrie, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would make 3 points here in terms of when to bring in UX. I'm going to say day one, like day one. UX is not a bolt-on feature. Please hear us when we say that. UX is not a bolt-on feature. And if you treat your UX like an afterthought, it's going to look and feel like an afterthought to your users. I promise you that. So lots of good things said here, but yeah, day one.
So you all reference also UX team, and making sure that your UX team is in touch with IT, for example, to make sure that things are actually feasible, and the developers, of course. But on the UX side, who are the players on that team? And if folks don't, for example, if folks don't have in-house UX teams, what profiles of professionals should they be looking for assistance? Kerry, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great question. I think about 6 key players. I'd say the first, you've got your product owner, right? They own the problem that has to be solved. Then you've got the developer, who is responsible for that technical implementation. You've got your UX designer, so they're the ones that are doing designing the flows, but they're also playing an essential role in that they are the advocate for the user, right? All along the way, they're the ones that are advocating and making sure that the user's voice is heard. And then a content strategist, like this is your secret weapon. To me, it's a sanity check to make sure you communicate in simple human terms. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I can get into the weeds and get into some nerd speak pretty quick. So your content strategist, again, they're advocating for the user. They're thinking about how do we say these things in non-technical terms that your users are going to get. So really important that you get a content strategist or someone dealing with that. Then you've got marketing, right? So they're going to be the ones that are helping they're your sort of drive adoption ninjas, right? So if we think about, we're talking about flows, which are very important, but there's things that happen outside of the flow, right? How are you communicating to users? How are you driving them into a flow in these other channels that we talked about earlier? What happens afterwards? So having, working with a marketing person is also really essential. And then the last one is legal. Kevin talked about it a little bit, and it's really important, especially here in the UK, in the EU, where we have PSD2 and GDPR. We have a lot of regulations here, and so that can heavily impact your flows. And so an example is after a user has registered here in the UK, they're going to have to reauthorize every 90 days. Now that's going to be a really simple process, but you're going to want to set those expectations. And so when and how and where you do that is going to be important. And so when you bring legal in from the get-go, it's like, now you can understand like what are all the content bits, and that's a really important one. And that's I've learned that lesson the hard way. So just it's good to plug in with them early.
Thanks, Kerry. I love that point about content and getting in the weeds. Of course, we're the FIDO Alliance, right? So, hey, we use terms like platform authenticator, right? Something's telling me that might not be the right term for a consumer, but I guess our testing will find out. But
Exactly.
that's where the content strategists come in, and they fix you right up with with terminology that'll actually work. Judy, any thoughts on team?
Everything that Kerry said, I mean, I agree 100% with how she described it. There's, without being redundant, the only thing I would add is we were starting to talk about research. The UX folks can, the way they lay it out and the content and legal and all that stuff is spot on. And the one other thing is research. UX can also help you with where, what, making it more meaningful to the user and repeatable. If they're seeing it in various places and it's more familiar to them, they're more likely to adopt it. And adoption is our end game, right? That's where we're striving to be. So if we're looking at the research and what's out there and having UX to help us to place it and content to make it more understandable, and then having them in day one, you can look to see what looks best, what works best, and try out a few different options through research and really just getting there to finalize the project process and get out a product that'll be easily used.
Thanks, Judy. Kevin, thoughts on team makeup? You mentioned this earlier. Maybe you want to build on you said earlier.
I think Kerry and Judy really covered it. I guess the only other bit I might add is, I know in the audience here, we might have very small startups that don't have any UX team internally. We might have, we definitely have very large organizations. So when we talk about UX team, at a very small company, if you have any UX folks in-house, it might be a UX team of one, and that's not uncommon. So, and that's okay also, and bring that person in at the start of the project. But the other thing to think about is if you don't have any UX and you're a small company and you're not quite sure, well, FIDO is saying I should bring these folks in early. Certainly there's a lot of contract resources you could look at, and of course hiring. I think there are 4 elements of UX, just big picture. We'll see if it helps anybody that might be at a small company. But UX is really 4 things. It's human factors, it's marketing, and it's technology and aesthetics. And the point that I want to try to drive home is, if you're looking for your first UX hire, or you're looking to contract a UX designer, make sure you don't only focus on the aesthetics. And get a mix, get people who understand all 4. Again, the 4 are human factors, marketing, technology, and aesthetics. And it's much more than aesthetics. The UX team brings much more than aesthetics.
I think that's an important distinction. I think all 3 of you really were clear that, we have design and we have content, and these are, 2 things that need to work together to, create an optimal UX flow. So last question. So we've mentioned quite a few times, and you've mentioned this yourselves. We are FIDO Alliance is doing research into these optimal flows. You all have played a role in designing the flows and also in helping us frame the testing parameters and how we work with our testing firm. So I just want to be clear, these folks are leading the way here, and myself and Andrew are sort of standing by and deferring to their expertise, and we're very grateful for that. But what I want to ask is there any anecdotes that you can share with us about the process of designing these flows, and or any early anecdotes of what you've been seeing in the testing process? And we've done a little bit of testing so far, I'll leave it at that, but let's start with Kerry.
Sure. So I'd probably talk about a few things just in terms of like the process of designing these flows. So as a team, we were really clear about what our study objectives were, right? We knew we couldn't boil the ocean, and so we had to really narrow our focus and determine, exactly what we were going to be researching. And that's an important thing, just in general, when you do research, is be really clear about what you're trying to learn. So one of the first things that we did is because we were looking at the banking industry, we wanted to make sure that we really reflected reality, right? So when we did initial designs, it was sort of this really sort of simple homepage and this login experience. And Kevin was the first one to pipe up to say, I think we want to be a little bit more reflective about what an actual banking homepage is. And this is important because if you think about the complexity, everything that's on a banking homepage, you've got marketing elements, you've got the sign-in, you've got their call to action to create an account or to do whatever. Those things are real. Like we have to compete with that. And so the more you have to be realistic, right? So the more realistic you are, the better result you're going to get. You're going to understand where, again, maybe those unhappy paths are. And then the other thing that we were able to do is really start to tease out, or we can really see the complexity and the nuances of the FIDO ecosystem. I mentioned it earlier, right? You've got relying party, you've got the browser, you've got the platform authenticator, you've got the FIDO brand, right? And so how does all of that work together in a really sort of seamless, simple way? So all the flows that we did, we looked at two. We looked at both, what does this look like for Windows Hello? What does this look like for Mac? So, the task was exactly the same, but those flows look different because the browser and the platform authenticators are different. And we wanted to make sure that we were testing, reality. So that was an important bit. And, so I don't know if you want to chime in a little bit here, Kevin and Judy, because then I can talk about some of the things that we're starting to see that we are starting to see in the research. But do you want me to talk about that now, or do other people want to talk about the process?
One thing that was important about the process is as we were looking through it, there was a lot of commentary about what was being said and what a user would be able to understand, when they would want to see it, what order would they want to see it in, and how to keep it easy for them. And also knowing that most users don't read things. They might read a word or two and skim over and keep going. So it's really, what are going to be your first couple words? What's going to be your lead in? So what's going to be obvious? And think about color, font, placement, location, like it's real estate, because it is where's it going to be obvious for a customer to be able to see a button, to click on it, to know the actions, to put the wording, to know what this means and what they're doing. And, UX is all about that. What's the layout? What's the look? What's the tone? What's the content? And the less words you're using to convey a meaningful message.
So words are very important, yet you need to use as few of them as possible. So you can see why it's so important to have a content strategist, but also to test these things to see what's resonating and which words work so that you can drill down on those terms, right? I mean, that's what I've noticed so far as I've been watching the testing that we've been doing. Kevin, anything you want to add to that?
Well, there's so much. There's so much that we learn, going through this research, and every research project is like this. So maybe just two things is the audience here, you may or may not have ever done any user experience research. So to give you a sense of what this is like is, we live and breathe FIDO and authentication, these few seconds that are so critical in these big user journeys. But for the end user, they just want to get in to do their task. They just want to get in. They just want to get in to check their bank account status or to see if the check is cleared, et cetera, et cetera. So when we've been saying research during this panel here today, what we're talking about is, and Kerry talked about it, is we're setting up a scenario where we're having people complete a banking task. And by the way, during that task, we're introducing FIDO, but they don't know, the research participants don't know that we're testing the authentication method or that we're testing whether or not they choose to enroll or not. Their task is given to them, is to log in and check their bank account status. So I just want to make that clear, that that's really where we learn so much, because again, people are motivated by that end task, not by logging in. Logging in is never the end result. So we end up learning a lot during that research process. I mean, I'm excited for when the research comes out, for the community, and all the things that we've already learned. There's going to be hopefully even great discussions with some of the operating system providers, around the findings that we're already discovering.
Do you want to chime in again, Kerry?
Yeah, yeah. I'll just add a few other comments just in terms of some of the we're getting so much great feedback, and some of the things that there's a lot of really encouraging stuff there. I mean, overall users are getting it, like they get it, and the want and desire is there. So to me, that's a huge win. Like we're not having to arm wrestle them to go, yeah, okay, I think I see the value. Like they get it, and that's really good for all of us. And we've been talking so much about content, but a lot of the feedback that we're getting is around the messaging. And so one of the great things that we've learned is that, like, just in terms of messaging is it's sort of like a 1-2 punch, right? There's sort of communicate the value first and then tell me how it works, right? And so we played around with the language and in some of the headlines and how do we actually, get again, someone into a flow. We're getting really clear signals around that. So that's really encouraging. We're really excited to share that with you. And then the last one is probably not going to be really popular, but I do want to state the obvious is like FIDO is an unfamiliar brand. And so we have work to do around that. We need to figure out, we can't just simply say FIDO certified, because if you don't know what FIDO is, then for them to do the certification doesn't mean anything. So I think we need to work together to say, like, how are we going to leverage the FIDO brand? Like, where and how does that make sense? How is that instilling confidence in the user? So I think no one's surprised by that, but there's definitely, we're seeing some themes and some signals that we can build on and really like uplift that brand.
It's really important to get out that value proposition, as you were just saying, Kerry. It's really important, as we've been saying throughout this, that content, just having the banner out there, having the messaging be right and crisp and clear and quick, because the authentication is a means to the end. The users are there to do a task. They're there to check, as Kevin said, they're there to check their balance. Logging in is incidental. It's something they have to do. They want it to be quick, easy, safe, and secure, and not a hindrance. So if we are putting something in for sign up to get that adoption, it has to be easy and quick and clear. Otherwise, they're gonna be like, why are you doing this to me? It's gonna be an annoyance. And they're just gonna put it to the side, and then it's stuck in their head that this is an annoying thing, and they're just gonna keep going. So you really have to have that value proposition out there of what's in it for me, and why should I be clicking through this to make me take an extra 30 seconds to sign up for it and then go on my way, because I'm here to do something this wasn't in. So it's really important to keep that in mind as you're designing this.
Well, thank you so much, Judy, Kerry, and Kevin, for being with us today. So I had asked each of them at the onset of this, what is something you really want our audience to take away today? And there were two, which is around the value prop. So are you clear on what the value proposition is for your customers? So that's one of the questions that they really want you to be asking yourself coming out of this. And then two, do I have the right team assembled? And I think that they did a great job of explaining who the players are and how you can leverage even external professionals if you need to. And then the third thing, which is actually mine, which is, stay tuned for the guidance coming out of the FIDO Alliance later this year. And if you want to, be amongst the first to get that guidance, just contact me, Megan at FIDOalliance.org, or go to FIDOalliance.org and sign up for updates, and you'll get that news when that UX guidance comes out. And now, so let's turn it over for Q&A.